Hi, I have a mic and a pulse, and as was foretold in the prophecy, today I'm going to talk about Fallout 4, and more specifically, the Brotherhood of Steel. This is the second video in a 3-ish part Fallout 4 rewrite series, but they're mostly independent, so the first one isn't required viewing. The bottom line is that it was about the Institute. We said they were making synths in an attempt to improve on humanity, gave them a redemption arc in which you show them you can make a world that's safe for humans and synths to coexist, and then screwed up that happy ending by having the Coursers rebel and destroy half the Institute out of fear that the humans would enslave the synths instead of living in peace with them. So today we're going to talk about the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood itself is decently written, with a clear goal and ideology, but it fails to take into account the fact that organizations are made up of people who have their own personal views and struggles, and I think if we focused a little more on the internal and personal tensions of the Brothers of Steel, they would be more interesting and more dynamic as characters and as a faction. Part 1. With friends like these, it's really helpful to have enemies to focus your aggressive energies on. The biggest missed opportunity for the Brotherhood as a whole is the fact that they're written to be completely unified. As a refresher, in Fallout 3 the Brotherhood was split into two factions. The Outcasts, who wanted to follow the Brotherhood of Steel's traditional style of hoarding advanced technology and isolating themselves, and Elder Owen Lyon's Brotherhood, which was actually using its advanced tech to help people and fought alongside you to defeat the Enclave. By the time of Fallout 4, these two factions recombined due to a war with a super mutant army that required their combined forces to win. Now, Fallout 4 as written treats it like Lyon's Brotherhood was weak because of Lyon's poor leadership and foolish straying from the Codex, and says that with the Outcasts back, everyone in the Brotherhood realized what a mistake helping outsiders was and decided to be jerks again. But I don't really buy that. The Lyons Brotherhood was much stronger than any of the West Coast Brotherhoods sitting in bunkers and losing wars to the NCR, and a major part of that was their willingness to work with outsiders, and especially recruit them. So pretending that was some kind of mistake feels forced. They did suffer heavy losses defending the capital wasteland from a super mutant army that came from absolutely nowhere, but if they had sat in the Citadel, they would have just lost access to all supplies and been besieged until they starved to death or were killed, assuming they weren't already killed by the Enclave poisoning the water purifier or nuking them with their killsat. It does, however, make sense that the Outcasts would gain a fair amount of influence during the war, because A, the Lyons Brotherhood would come to them for help, so the Outcasts would have some power to make some demand, and B, the Lyons Brotherhood would be strengthened by the influx of Wastelander recruits, but at the same time would lose some of its more experienced soldiers in the war, so even though the recruits would be getting more experienced over time and some would rise through the ranks, the fact that the Outcasts mostly had soldiers who were there from birth would give them an edge in combat that would help more of their soldiers rise through the ranks. Overall, the likely outcome would be that the bulk of the Brotherhood was still made of Lyons men and recruits who had a greater desire to help outsiders and fight the good fight, but the Outcasts would be disproportionately represented at higher ranks, giving them outsized influence in their quest to control advanced tech. So we can still make the Brotherhood less warm and cuddly than they were in 3, but without going so far in the opposite direction that they turn into the Enclave. And I know some of you are thinking that the Brotherhood have to be like the Outcasts were because the lore says so, but A, at least 2/3 of the story of the Brotherhood is about the tension between following the Codex and making good decisions, which is basically just the to be lawful or good trope, and B, a story isn't just a mechanism for converting lore into plot points. They are people, they have individual minds, and they make decisions that aren't the same decisions totally different people 200 years earlier would have made. So, since I've said this is about people, let's talk about them. Part 2. Heavy is the head that runs the blimp. The Brotherhood only really has 4 major characters: Maxon, Dance, Ingram, and Kells, and the most central of these is Maxon, so we'll start with him. The game treats Maxon as the absolute perfect Brotherhood soldier. He's a skilled commander, an unparalleled fighter, utterly dedicated to the cause, and completely fearless. He has serious flaws, largely due to his goal of eradicating the synth, but those flaws are the flaws of the Brotherhood, and not his own personal weaknesses. But what do we really know about him? We know that he's 20 years old, that he's hundreds of miles from home, that he's fighting an enemy he knows almost nothing about, that the lives of hundreds of his men ride on his every decision, and that he is the only surviving descendant of the founder of the Brotherhood. This adds up to an enormous amount of pressure that the base game makes very little attempt to convey. In fact, I would like to add a little more pressure by saying that instead of being Elder Maxon, he's only Sentinel Maxon, with Sarah Lyons in charge at the capital, and this expedition has placed far more men under his command than ever before, with the addition of the internal politics meaning that not all of those men get along, and many of his officers are trying to sway his views while he's just trying to live up to the ideals of a Brotherhood that can't even decide what its ideals are. And some of you may be thinking that I'm taking a cool, badass character and making him into a neurotic wimp, but that's not really true, because a character who carries massive burdens and doesn't break under them is far stronger and more interesting than someone who has no burdens at all. If Atlas didn't have to hold up the sky, he would just be a muscly guy with his arms above his head. The burden is is what makes Atlas Atlas, and acknowledging Maxon's burden would make him more heroic when he succeeds and more tragic when he fails. As mentioned before, his views would be heavily influenced by the other Brotherhood officers he turns to for advice, mostly Dance, Kels, and Ingram, since they're the three other Brotherhood members with a decent amount of screen time. We get almost no background from Kels except that he was in the Brotherhood as a child, and he strikes me as a former outcast, very dedicated to the Brotherhood's views, not particularly charitable, but good at his job. He looks at things from the air, seeing the big picture, not all the people on the ground. He'd be telling Maxon to focus on the Brotherhood and not waste time or risk lives on outsiders. Ingram doesn't seem that political. She lost both her legs fighting mutants and still wants to get back into the field, so we know she's both tough and dedicated to the cause, which for her probably involves a combination of smiting evil and confiscating tech, since the mutants had a Fat Man and mini nukes, so she would probably be happier if any weapons that powerful were safely under Brotherhood control, and any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from a really big gun. As chief engineer, she might be concerned about just running out of stuff if the Brotherhood keeps overextending itself, but she's not going to make everyone stop doing things just to make her job easier. Her main vice story-wise is that as someone whose job teaches them that every machine will always break down at some point, she would not trust synths, because even as sophisticated as they are, they will break down someday, and she doesn't know what happens when they do. Dance is an odd case, because in-game he very much has the Brotherhood issue, take the tech, protect people from themselves mentality, but his actual backstory is, well, it's somewhat confused by the fact that he's an escaped synth with some false memories, but at some point he lived in Rivet City as a scrap merchant before volunteering to join Lion's Brotherhood, so based on his backstory, he should probably be one of the more outsider-friendly paladins, which is also why he would recruit you so easily, but his backstory also involves his best friend being forcibly turned into a super mutant, giving him a deep and abiding hatred of mutants that could easily branch out into synths, since there are some similarities, and the possibility that someone could be kidnapped and have their face and memory stolen and used to hurt the ones they love would strike him as damn near the worst crime in the entire world. So, heroic but anti-synth makes the most sense. I think it's also important that Dance and Maxon be fairly close, with Maxon having looked up to Dance as a shining example of what a Brotherhood soldier should be for much of his teenage years, and taking his advice very seriously. Dance is also important because his team are the only ones who have any experience dealing with Commonwealth, and that's something that should be played up. The rest of the Brotherhood is here because he brought them here. In-game Maxon shows up, gives a big speech about what synths are and why they're evil and have to be destroyed, and then gets right to it. And I think it would be more interesting if they were as completely in the dark about the Institute as everyone else. They know they made the mutants, and the Brotherhood hates mutants, so they will go to great efforts to stop people from making more, but they don't know anything about synths other than what they've heard rumors about. Their goals initially wouldn't be to just wage an extermination war against synths, it would be to figure out what was going on and what the Institute really was. On top of making more synth, I think the change would also make it a bit easier to side with them, since there wouldn't be a big honking genocide-shaped red flag being waved at you the second you met Maxon, especially since if you've got an Act 2, then you've met Nick Valentine, who is one of the most morally upstanding and instantly likable characters in the entire franchise, so there's no real valid reason for you to hate all synths. This way they only realize that synths are meant to replace humanity and decide they should be destroyed after you infiltrate the Institute, so you've got all of Act 2 to make friends with them while they seem mostly nice. Part 3. A synth in my paramilitary organization? The answer may shock you. So, the Brotherhood has a lot of plot moments, like taking Fort Strong, rebuilding Prime, and fighting the Institute. But the biggest story moment by far is when it's revealed that Paladin Dance is a synth, and you're asked to hunt him down. Now, the game basically treats it like this. Some Institute files out Dance as a synth, so he runs to his bunker and thinks about killing himself because he's ashamed of what he is, and then once you've talked him down, Maxon shows up and also wants to kill him because synths don't match up with his traditional values, and then you talk him down too, and Maxon tells Dance that no synth is welcome in his paramilitary organization and kicks him out, and then Dance gets a new suit of power armor and sleeps over at your settlement while he finds himself. While this is a touching story of one synth's coming of age that speaks to the hypothetical souls of artificial humanoids everywhere, it lacks both moral ambiguity and choices/consequences other than Dance leaving the Brotherhood or Dance dying, and I think we can make it a lot more interesting if we played up one simple fact. Synths are infiltrators. If we keep it ambiguous for a while as to whether Dance was always a synth who just happened to escape, travel several hundred miles to DC without remembering it, join the Brotherhood and rise through the ranks, be assigned to a mission to go back to the place he escaped from, and then call the Brotherhood there because he had fought a few robots and heard a few rumors about the Institute, or whether the real Dance was killed by the Institute and replaced with a synth who brought the Brotherhood to the Commonwealth so the Institute could kill them, we can make it a bit more interesting for everyone involved. The player is now on a quest test for the truth instead of just passing some charisma checks. Maxon, instead of being a jerk, is now freaking out because he has no idea how compromised the Brotherhood might be, and his trusted friend Dance may have been killed long ago with his face and memories stolen, and Dance is freaking out because he's also not sure whether his memories are even real, and whether he's got some hidden programming he doesn't even know about that could make him kill his friends. In the base game, you know that he's a runaway because the network scanner holotape you used got basically all of the Institute's data on one holotape, including all of the files on runaways. But in this version, it would be a little harder to prove Dance's innocence, as the files on runaways would be stored separately, and you would only know that robotics manufactured him, not what happened afterwards. To get them, you would have to go to some kind of archive room in the SRB, but to get in, you'd have to talk to some sort of synth, and they'd ask you who you were looking for and whether you needed any help bringing them in, and you could either leave and not get the evidence but maintain your relationship, fight your way in and get the data but also get exiled, help them recall Dance if you're a Hellfire enthusiast, or just talk your way in by saying it's nothing or that you can handle it on your own. So if you don't get the tape, things play out kind of like in the normal game, but worse. Dance, you can calm down, but Maxon will not listen to you if you don't have proof, because you're just going off your gut instinct that Dance isn't an infiltrator, and he can't accept that as an argument, because again, he has a massive amount of responsibility, and risking the lives of hundreds of his men because of your gut instinct is not happening. So Dance accepts that he should be killed, and Maxon shoots him, and he feels really weird and conflicted about it because he's not sure whether Dance is being a loyal soldier to the end, or making some last-ditch attempt to manipulate him. But he does it because he can't risk not doing it, and he tells you to report back to the Pridwin for further orders, and he leaves. If you do have the tape, things go differently. Everything through getting Dance to leave the bunker is normal, but as soon as Maxon shows up, the three of you get attacked by a squad of synths and coursers, because when you went to the archives, the system logged your search and the SRB figured out what you were doing, so they sent a team to see if you were actually recalling Dance or whether you were betraying them, and since it's the latter, the team attacks you, and you and Maxon fight them off while Dance gets back to the bunker, because if they say his codes, then he's a liability and not an asset. Maxon is briefly fairly certain that Dance set up the ambush and betrayed you, but if you play the tape for him, he'll quickly accept that Dance is the real Dance and calm down, and then you'll have to work through some issues, like how Dance could not know he was a synth, and what to do with Dance now, since the recall code issue is still real. But since everyone has calmed down a little, you come up with the solution of just keeping him on the Pridwin, since if the Institute has gotten aboard the Pridwin, they've pretty much won anyway. So, having accepted that Dance is a good person and also a synth, Maxon is forced to accept that synths are not inherently evil, and therefore decides that they don't have to exterminate them. So, in the process of saving Dance, you've also kind of saved Maxon's soul as well. Though, because the technology to make infiltrators still exists and is very dangerous, they do still need to destroy it and the Institute. Part 4. Everybody lives, except the people who don't. So if the Brotherhood no longer wants to exterminate the synths, the Railroad and Brotherhood no longer have to be enemies, and you would have the option to make peace between them, provided you also stop the Battle of Bunker Hill with the Minutemen, as mentioned in the last video, because if Railroad agents had actively killed Brotherhood soldiers, then Maxon would not be willing to forgive them. So the Railroad and Brotherhood would agree not to kill each other, and the Brotherhood would agree not to kill the synths, and then you would just do the ending of the Brotherhood questline, with Prime smashing the Institute and all that. Except this time the Railroad is also there. They might have gotten that synth rebellion started, depending on how much Railroad stuff you got done before being exiled, they might just be shooting people. So you win, Father is disappointed in you, you nuke the Institute, conflict resolved. And then you talk to Maxon aboard the Pridwin, and he seems a lot more well-adjusted than he was when he first got there, having successfully completed the biggest mission of his life, kept most of his men alive, and maintained control of all of the various soldiers who may have objected to him not destroying the synths. He's now a lot more confident, and is definitely going to be a good influence on the Brotherhood moving forward. And by moving forward, I mean going back the way they came, because I think it would be more dramatic and satisfying, and also just a better visual if they flew off into the sunset instead of just staying over the airport indefinitely. Because they've fixed Prime, gotten some tech, including maybe artillery plans you give them as a bonus, and destroyed the Institute, so they have no real reason to stay. But they are going to leave a small team behind to keep an eye on things, led by now Star Paladin Dance, who is free again because without the Institute there's not much risk of him being recalled, and it would create more tension to keep him aboard than it would to just keep him overseeing the Commonwealth, with maybe a vertebrate or two left behind in case you need a ride. That's mostly it. Time for a lightning round! 1. You still don't need training to use power armor, but you do need training to repair power armor. That way you can still have the fun beginning fight with the Deathclaw at full power, but you can't use your power armor sustainably until you get repair training from either proctoring them when you get to the Pridwin, or the Atom Cats, because they don't have enough to do in the plot. 2. Deathclaws, especially in the Glowing Sea, come in packs. That way there's still room to escalate from fighting a Deathclaw at the beginning of the game. 3. Miniguns are stronger, so that vertibirds are more powerful, but you get less ammo for the first fight. Also, advanced vertibirds at higher levels have Gatling lasers instead of miniguns to stay viable. Vertibirds also have more armor because they're cartoonishly fragile. 5. T-51 power armor is back to being the best pre-war power armor, and T-60 was developed by the Brotherhood, and they use a combination of all power armors, including Exo-1 stolen from the Enclave. 6. Ingram and Maxon wear actual armor in combat. That's all. Next time talking about the DLC.